Every morning at 6, I unlocked the doors of the Marigold Row Community Center with a key worn so smooth that the teeth had nearly disappeared. 40 years of turning it in the same stiff lock will do that to a key. It will do it to a woman, too, if she lets it. I swept the floor they wanted to bulldoze. I wiped down the long folding tables and set out the metal chairs in their crooked rows. The same chairs that by 2 o'clock that afternoon would be filled by men in suits, worth more than my carmen who had come to decide the future of a neighborhood they believed belonged to them. They called me the cleaning lady. My own son introduced me that way once to a man who mattered to him. That's just my mother. She helps keep the place tidy. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He gestured toward me the way you gesture toward a coat rack. I smiled, I nodded. I went on sweeping, because here is the thing none of them knew. Not my son, not the developers with their renderings and their loans. Not the city, not the aldermen, not the young couples already circling the block like it was an open house. The ground beneath that community center was mine. So was the building beside it, and the one across the street with the laundromat on the first floor, and the corner lot where Callaway's bank used to stand before it closed in '91, and the row of brownstones the city had stamped, condemned in red, and the empty parcel behind the church, and 40 more years of quiet, deliberate, invisible decisions that no one had ever thought to ask a woman like me about. That morning they sat in my chairs and planned what to do with my neighborhood. I swept, and I listened. Because the deed in the safe behind my bedroom wall carried my name, Vivian Reed Ellison, and I had decided a long time ago on a cold night that took everything from me that the day they finally looked at me would be a day of my choosing. Not theirs. I just didn't expect it to come this week. Let me tell you how the world saw me so you understand what they were working with. I am 64 years old. I am a black woman with gray coming in at my temples that I have stopped bothering to cover. My hands are knotted at the knuckles. I wear the same 3 cardigans on a rotation, and I carry my things in a vinyl bag that was free with a magazine subscription in 2009. When I walk into a room, I have learned people's eyes slide off me the way rain slides off a windshield. I am background. I am furniture. I am the soft, harmless shape of an old woman, and a soft, harmless shape is the easiest thing in the world to talk over. So they talk over me. Take the Tuesday before all of this began. I was in the community center kitchen washing the coffee urns when my son Russell came in with Gregory Vance. I knew who Vance was. Everyone on the block knew the name on the signs that had started appearing on fences and bus shelters. Vance Development Building, tomorrow's South Side. A tall man, 50-something, with a good coat and the kind of confidence that comes from never once in his life being the smallest person in the room. Russell was nervous around him. I could see it in the way my boy's shoulders had crept up toward his ears. Russell is 41 years old, and he has spent his whole life trying to be looked at the way Vance gets looked at, and never quite managing it. "This is the space," Russell said, walking Vance through like a realtor. 200 people fit in here easy, once the rezoning clears. Vance's eyes passed over me at the sink, passed over me like I was the urn I was holding. "And her? That's just my mother," Russell said. "She keeps the place tidy. Mama, this is Mr. Vance." I dried my hand on my apron and held it out. Vance shook it the way you shake hands with someone you've already decided you'll never need to remember. 2 pumps. A smile that didn't reach anything. "Pleasure, ma'am." And he was already turning back to Russell, already pointing at the load-bearing wall, already saying we'd take this out, open the sight lines. I stood there with my hand still warm from his. Now I want to be honest with you about something, because it matters for everything that comes after. In that moment, I felt the old hot thing rise up in my chest. The thing that wanted to set the urn down and say, "Mr. Vance, do you know whose wall you're planning to take out?" The thing that has wanted to speak for 40 years. And then I did what I have always done. I let it pass. I picked up the next urn. It is a particular kind of strength, the kind nobody gives you credit for, the strength to not be seen when being seen would feel so good. To swallow the satisfaction. To let a man believe he's the most powerful person in a room you happen to own. My husband Sam used to say it was the most expensive thing I ever bought, that silence. He said I paid for it every single day and never once let anybody see the bill. He was right. He was usually right. It wasn't only Vance, of course. It would be easier if it were only Vance. A stranger looking through you doesn't cut the way your own children do. My daughter Denise is 38. She lives out in the suburbs in a house with a 2-car garage and a lawn she pays a service to mow, and she is, I think, a little ashamed of where she comes from. She loves me. I want to be clear about that because she is not a villain, and I will not let anyone, not even you, make her one. She loves me the way you love something you've decided is fragile, from a careful distance, with a slight wince. 2 days after Vance walked through my kitchen, Denise sat at the table in Russell's house, the house I live in the small back room, which is its own quiet humiliation. I'll come to, and she made a phone call right in front of me. Yes, hi, I'm calling about the memory care wing Cedar Glen on Hargrove. She had a brochure open on the table, glossy full of photographs of silver-haired white women laughing over watercolors. It's for my mother. She's starting to get a little confused. We want to get ahead of it, before something happens. Before Mama gets confused. She said it 3 feet from me while I sat shelling peas into a bowl, as though confusion were already so far along that I couldn't hear my own name. I didn't get confused. I shelled the peas. I noted the name Cedar Glen on Hargrove Avenue and the price she winced at when the woman on the phone said it $1,200 a month for the shared room and the date she circled in the brochure. Friday. They wanted me in by Friday. Specific things. I have always held on to specific things. Names, dates, dollar amounts, the exact words people use when they think you can't understand them. Sam taught me that. Vivian, he'd say the world will tell you you're a fool to your face, and then forget it said anything. Write it down. The specifics are how you'll know you weren't crazy. I wrote it down. Cedar Glen, Hargrove, Friday, $1,200 a month. What none of them knew was that I could have bought Cedar Glen, the building, the land under it, and the parking lot too, with cash and still not noticed the dent. But I shelled my peas, and I let my daughter plan to put me away. There was one person who saw me. There is always one, isn't there? My granddaughter Jordan. Denise's girl, 17, all elbows and opinions, and a phone she's surgically attached to. That evening, after Denise hung up, Jordan slid into the chair next to me and took a handful of peas to shell, which she is terrible at. She splits them straight down the middle every time, and she said low, just for me, "Grandma, you're not confused." I kept my eyes on this bowl. "No, baby. They think you don't hear them." "I hear everything, Jordan." She looked at me, then really looked with that fierce, frowning attention teenagers have before the world teaches them to be polite about things. "Then why don't you say something?" And Lord, I wanted to tell her. I wanted to take that child by both hands and say, "Listen to me. Your grandmother is the largest landowner south of the river. Your grandmother has been buying back this neighborhood 1 brick at a time for 40 years, so that no one could ever do to it what they're about to try to do. Your grandmother is not the one who should be afraid in this house." Instead, I said, "Some things you say once, sweetheart. You only get to say them once, so you wait until they'll actually be heard." She didn't understand it. How could she? But she filed it away. I could see her do it the way I do it, and she went back to splitting peas down the middle, and I loved her so much in that moment that my chest ached with it. There's a toolbox by the back door. Sam's old steel toolbox, paint-flecked with a clasp you have to hit just right to open. Russell keeps meaning to throw it out. "That junk, Mama, nobody's going to use that." I've kept it out of his reach for 3 years now. I want you to remember that toolbox. It's going to matter. That night I went home. Not to the back room at Russell's, that's where I sleep, where I'm supposed to be the dependent old mother folded into a corner of her son's house. After they were all asleep, I did what I have done 2 or 3 nights a week for longer than Jordan has been alive. I put on my coat. I walked 4 blocks through the dark to a brick 2-flat on Reed Street. Yes, that Reed Street, the one I took my name back from when I needed a name. nobody would look at twice. And I let myself into the upstairs apartment that the records say belongs to a company and that the company says belongs to no one in particular. It's a small place. A kettle, a good chair, a lamp, a wall of filing cabinets, and a floor safe under the rug by the window. I knelt down my knees, don't love it anymore, and I worked the dial and I opened it. People imagine when they hear the word fortune, something that glitters. There was nothing in that safe that glittered. Just paper, deeds, title insurance, 40 years of closing statements held together with binder clips organized by year in my own handwriting. The first folder is labeled 1984. The most recent is this one. Let me tell you what's in those folders because the men sitting in my chairs that afternoon would have given anything to know. Reed Street Holdings, LLC, owner of record 41 parcels across the 11 blocks that make up Marigold Row. The laundromat building, the old bank, the condemned brownstones. I condemned them on purpose through a friend at the city to keep the vultures off until I was ready. The lots, the storefronts, the 3 flats where families I've known my whole life pay me rent that hasn't gone up in 9 years because the company that owns their homes, the faceless company they grumble about, has only ever had one instruction: don't move the rent. Don't move the people, just hold the line. $32 million, give or take, the last time Earl ran the numbers. Earl Whitfield, my accountant, the only man besides Sam who ever knew the whole of it. $32 million in the name of a company, in the name of a woman who shells peas in the back room of her son's house and gets talked about like she's already gone. I didn't build it to be rich. I need you to understand that because it's the hinge the whole thing turns on. I have never once spent it on myself. I built it because of one cold night a long time ago, and I built it as a wall. Let me tell you about the cold night. It's the only way the rest makes sense. Sam and I were 24. We had been married 2 years, and we had saved every dollar either of us made me cleaning offices downtown Sam, swinging a hammer for other men's companies, and we had bought a building. Our first. A little 3-story walk-up on the east end of the row, 8 units brick gone soft at the mortar, but ours. We were going to fix it up, unit by unit. We were going to live in one and let the rent from the others carry us. It was going to be the beginning of everything. There was a man named Howard Vance. He came to us smiling. He always smiled. He was a developer, or called himself one, the kind that smelled distress, the way a dog smells fear. And he had a way of talking that made you feel you were the smartest person he'd ever met, right up until the moment you signed. He told us the title on our building was clouded, that there was a lien we'd missed a back tax problem, that the bank was about to call our note, and we'd lose everything for nothing. He told us he could make it disappear. All we had to do was sign a little restructuring agreement, just paperwork, just to protect ourselves. We were 24. We didn't have a lawyer. We trusted a smiling white man in a good coat because we were tired and scared, and he seemed to know things we didn't. What we signed gave him the building. There was no lien. There was no back tax problem. The whole thing was a story he told us in our own kitchen, and by the time we understood it, the deed had his name on it, and ours was on a piece of paper that meant nothing, and a judge with no interest in 2 young black kids from the row told us not unkindly that we should have read more carefully. We lost it all. 2 years of savings, the building, and something else. Something I have never had a word for: the belief that being honest and working hard was enough. That belief died in a courthouse hallway, and I have never gotten it back, and I have never wanted it back, because the thing that grew in its place was harder, and it has served me better. That night Sam cried. My Sam, who never cried. He sat on the edge of our bed with his face in his hands, and he said, "Vivian, I don't know how to protect you. I don't know how." And I sat down next to him, and I made him a promise. I said, "Then I'll learn. I'll learn everything they know, and I'll learn it so quiet that nobody ever sees me coming. And I will buy back this whole neighborhood, brick by brick, and no Vance, no bank, no city, no anybody is ever going to take a single home off this block again. Not while I'm breathing. He looked at me like I was either crazy or the only sane person he'd ever met. Then he took my hand, and he said the words that made him my partner for the next 40 years. He said, "Okay, how do we start?" We started the next week. I got my real estate license under my maiden name. I read every book in the public library on title law, on tax sales, on the slow, patient machinery by which property moves from hand to hand. Sam kept swinging his hammer, and I kept cleaning offices, and every dollar over what we needed to live went into the wall. One parcel at a time. A tax sale lot here. A foreclosure there bought from the bank that didn't think to ask why a cleaning woman wanted it. We never told the children. We never told anyone. We let the world go on believing Sam was a small contractor, and I was his quiet wife. Because the moment anyone knew what we were building, the price of everything would change. And worse, the nature of everything would change. People would start performing for me. My own children would start performing for me. I had seen what money did to the way people looked at each other, and I had decided that cold night that I would rather be looked through than looked at like a bank. Howard Vance died 15 years ago. I read the obituary twice and felt nothing I'm proud of. By then, I already owned the building he stole from us. I bought it back at a tax sale in 2003 for cash through the company, and the man who sold it to me had no idea he was closing a circle 40 years in the making. It's the laundromat building now. The families upstairs have no idea their landlord cried in a courthouse hallway over those same bricks when she was 24. That's what was in the safe, not a fortune. A wall built one brick at a time by a woman nobody was looking at. I closed the folders. I closed the safe. I turned off the lamp. And I want to tell you that I went home that night feeling powerful, feeling ready. But the truth is, I went home and lay in the small back room of my son's house and stared at the ceiling because somewhere in the dark, between Reed Street and Russell's back door, a thought had come to me that I couldn't put back down. Vance Development, Gregory Vance. I had heard the first name in my kitchen and let it pass because I was holding an urn and being looked through. But lying in the dark, it came back and sat on my chest. Howard Vance had a son. I didn't know yet, not for certain, not the way I would know by the end of that week when I would stand in a glass conference room and watch a man's face change as he finally looked at me. But I knew enough to feel the ground shift. The man who wanted to bulldoze my neighborhood was carrying the same name as the man who taught me on the coldest night of my life exactly how the world takes things from people who aren't looking. And this time I was the one who wasn't being looked at. I lay there a long while. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I got up, walked to the back door, and I hit the clasp on Sam's old toolbox just right the way you have to, and I lifted the tray of rusted wrenches, and from underneath, I took out the thing I keep there. A photograph gone soft and yellow at the corners. 2 kids, 24 years old, standing in front of a soft-bricked walk-up on the east end of the row, squinting into the sun, certain the whole world was about to open for them. And folded behind it, brittle now, the restructuring agreement we signed in our own kitchen. Howard Vance's signature looped and confident right above ours. I held them both in the dark for a long time. Then I put them back, and I closed the toolbox and I went to bed. Because in the morning there would be coffee urns to wash and chairs to set out, and a room full of men who needed to keep believing for just a few days more that the woman with the broom was no one at all. I needed them to believe it. The whole plan depended on it. I just had to hold my silence a little while longer. The renderings went up on an easel in my community center at 2 o'clock the next afternoon, in front of 200 of my neighbors in the chairs I had set out at 6 that morning. I stood in the back by the coffee I'd made in my second-best cardigan, and I watched Gregory Vance sell my neighborhood to the people who already lived in it. He was good. I'll give him that. He had a clicker and a screen and a voice built for rooms like this, and he stood in front of a glowing picture of Marigold Renaissance. That's what they were calling it. Renaissance. As if the people who'd held this block through the riots and the crack years and the foreclosure wave had merely been waiting 4 decades for a white man with a clicker to make them relevant. The picture showed glass-fronted shops and a coffee place and young people on bicycles. There was not a single face in that rendering I recognized. There was not a single face in that rendering that looked like the people sitting in the chairs. "Nobody's being forced out," Vance said, and I watched the lie settle over the room like a fine dust. This is about opportunity. It's about finally bringing investment to a community that's been ignored for too long. Ignored. He stood in a building I owned on land I owned and told a room full of my tenants that they'd been ignored, and the worst part, the part that put a cold stone in my stomach, was the way some of them nodded. Some of them wanted to believe it. You get told for 40 years that nobody's coming to save you, and then a man with a good coat says opportunity, and a part of you, a tired part, leans toward the warmth of it. That's the thing money does that nobody warns you about. It doesn't just buy buildings, it buys the story people tell about themselves. Deacon Albert Green stood up near the front. 81 years old, been on the row longer than I have voice like a furnace door. "And the rents," he said. "When your shops come and your bicycles come, what happens to Miss Ruth on Pelham, who's been paying $400 a month for 30 years? What happens to her?" Vance smiled his father's smile. I knew it now. I'd spent the morning making sure. Market forces are complicated, sir. But change is coming to this neighborhood whether we lead it or not. The question is whether we have a seat at the table. We. As if he were one of us. As if the table weren't already his. My son Russell stood near the easel the whole time, slightly behind Vance, in a suit I'd never seen, nodding along like an apostle. And when a woman I've known 40 years asked with real fear in her voice whether this meant she'd lose her home, it was Russell who answered her. My Russell. He said, "Mrs. Okafor, I grew up on this block. You think I'd let anything happen to it, trust me." Trust me. I had to put my coffee down so I wouldn't drop it. I didn't go back to Russell's that afternoon. I walked the 4 blocks to Reed Street, and then I kept walking 2 more to a storefront with gold letters on the glass. Whitfield and Associates Accounting. Earl was expecting me. Patricia Boyd was already there. "These are my people. Let me introduce them properly because they are the only 2 human beings alive who know all of what I'm telling you. Earl Whitfield is 73 and has kept my books for 30 years. He grew up 2 doors down from the building Howard Vance stole from us. He knew Sam since they were boys. When I came to him in 1994 with a shoebox of closing statements and a request that he never speak of them to anyone, including my own husband's funeral guests, he didn't ask a single question. He just said, "Vivian, I've been waiting my whole life to watch somebody do something like this. Sit down. Patricia Boyd is my lawyer. 60 sharp as a new blade, the kind of woman who reads a 40-page contract the way you and I read a menu. I hired her 25 years ago because she was the only attorney in the city who, when I explained what I was trying to build and why I needed it invisible, didn't tell me it couldn't be done. She told me how much it would cost to do it right. I have never trusted anyone faster in my life." They had papers spread across Earl's conference table. I sat down and Patricia slid a folder toward me, and I knew before I opened it that the week had decided to stop waiting for me. "The city filed yesterday," she said. "Condemnation proceedings on the Pelham brownstones, eminent domain. They're moving to take them for the Renaissance footprint." "They're mine," I said. "They're Reed Street Holdings. And the city doesn't care who Reed Street Holdings is. They'll take the buildings, pay the LLC, a number Vance's people set, and bulldoze them by spring." She folded her hands. "Vivian, the wall you built only works if nobody knows who's behind it. But the day the city moves to take property by force, invisible stops protecting you. Invisible starts costing you. The only thing that stops eminent domain on this land now is a land trust with a preservation designation filed public and loud. Which means I have to come out from behind the curtain. Yes, I sat with that. 40 years. 40 years of being looked through, and I'd built the whole machine around the looking through. And now the only way to use the machine was to make everyone all at once finally look. "The trust documents," I said. "How ready?" Patricia almost smiled. I've been building them for 11 months on your instruction. The Marigold Row Community Land Trust is drafted, the board is structured, the preservation application is written. Every parcel transfers in. Rents capped in perpetuity. No resident can ever be displaced for profit, and no heir. She looked at me steadily. No heir can ever sell it out from under them. It needs your signature and a filing date. That's all. It could be real in 72 hours. 72 hours. 40 years and 72 hours. And then Earl cleared his throat in the way he does when he's about to tell me something he'd rather not, and he pulled a different folder from the bottom of the stack. There's more, he said, and you're not going to like it. What Earl showed me I want to tell you carefully, because it's the thing that nearly broke me before the night that actually did. Earl watches filings the way some men watch the weather. And 10 days earlier, a financing statement had crossed his desk, a public record, the kind nobody reads, that named my son. Russell had taken out a second mortgage on the family house. The house his father built, the house I live in the back of. And he'd pledged something else, too. Ellison and Son, the contracting business, every truck and tool, and the lease on the yard. He'd pledged all of it, everything he owned in the world, as collateral on a partnership agreement with Vance Development. And it gets worse, Earl said, quiet. The agreement obligates him to deliver. He signed a clause promising he'd secure the assembly of the Reed Street Holdings parcels. Vivian, your boy, bet his house and his business on a promise to hand Vance your land. He doesn't know it's yours. He thinks he's chasing some faceless company, and if he just finds the owner and leans on them hard enough, he closes the deal and saves himself. Earl took off his glasses. He can't close it. There's no version of this where he closes it. The owner is never going to sell. The owner is sitting at my table. I have buried a husband. I have lost a building and a belief in the same week. I thought I knew the shapes pain came in. This was a new one. My son had walked into the exact trap Howard Vance had set for Sam and me 40 years ago. A smiling man, a good coat, a partnership agreement, everything you own as the price, and he'd walked into it carrying Vance's son's hand. The wheel had come all the way around. And the cruelest joke in it, the one I couldn't stop turning over, was that the one person on earth who could have warned him, who had lived it, who had built a $32 million wall precisely so this could never happen again, was the old woman he introduced as she keeps the place tidy. He never asked me, not once. In all his fear, in all his scrambling, it never crossed Russell's mind that his mother might know something worth knowing. There's one more, Earl said, and now he wasn't quite looking at me. Since we're laying it all out. He slid a thin sheet across. 4 years ago, Russell was about to lose the business the first time before all this. A note came due he couldn't cover. $18,000. It got paid off by an anonymous lender at 0 interest, and the business survived, and he told everybody his luck had finally turned. Earl tapped the page. And Jordan's tuition, the Marigold Community Scholarship she won junior year, the one she's so proud of that she earned that nobody could quite say who funded. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Earl knew. Patricia knew. It was me. Of course it was me. I have spent 40 years being the luck that turned the scholarship. Nobody could trace the rent that never rose the hand under the family, that the family never once felt, and never once thought to thank because they never imagined a hand was there. I built that invisibility on purpose. I chose it. And sitting in Earl's office, I understood the bill Sam used to talk about, understood it all the way down, because the price of being a wall is that nobody leans on you knowing it's you. They just lean on the dark and call it good fortune. What do you want to do? Patricia asked. I looked at the trust documents. 72 hours from real. I looked at the financing statement with my son's signature on it, my son's house, my son's whole life staked on handing a stranger my land. I want to think, I said. Give me until tomorrow night. Vance is coming to the house tomorrow to push Russell to close. I want to be in that house when he does. I want to look at Howard Vance's son across my own kitchen, and I want to be sure." "Sure of what?" Earl said. "Of all of it," I said. "You only get to say a thing once, Earl. You only get to walk into the room once. I'm not walking in until I'm sure there's nothing left for them to say back." He came at 7 the next evening. I want you to picture the table. My son's dining room, the good tablecloth out, Denise, driven in from the suburbs with her husband Jordan, slumped in the corner chair with her phone and Mimi at the foot of the table, where they put me with a plate they'd filled without asking what I wanted on it. And at the head in Sam's chair, the chair my husband sat in for 30 years, they'd put Gregory Vance. I knew the second he walked in. I'd spent 2 days being sure, but I didn't need the 2 days. It was the smile. Howard Vance's son had his father's exact smile, the one that arrives a half second before he's decided you're worth smiling at. And I felt 40 years fold up like a paper fan, and I was 24 again in a kitchen signing. "Mrs. Ellison," he said to me, warm as anything, "Russell's told me so much about how you keep things running around here." A little laugh. The table laughed with him. "He's a good boy," I said. "He's always trusted the wrong people for the right reasons." A small silence. Vance's smile flickered just a flicker the way a candle moves when a door opened somewhere in the house, and then it steadied, and he decided I'd said something sweet and harmless, and he turned back to Russell. They talked business over my pot roast. Vance laid it out plain because why wouldn't he in front of the furniture? The rezoning was through. The condemnation on the Pelham buildings was filed. All that was left was the assembly, his word assembly, the way you'd talk about furniture, and Russell, my Russell, leaned forward and promised the son of the man who ruined us, that he'd have the Reed Street parcels locked down by Friday. He didn't know what he was promising. He was a man bailing his own boat with both hands and calling it swimming. "I just need to find who's behind that LLC, Russell said. "Some holding company, no name on it, lawyered up tight. But everybody sells eventually. Everybody's got a number." "Everybody's got a number." Vance agreed and lifted his glass. Sam's glass, and I watched my granddaughter watch me, because Jordan was the only one at that table whose eyes ever found me, and she was frowning at me with that fierce attention, trying to read what was moving behind my face. I gave her nothing. I ate my pot roast. I let the son of Howard Vance toast my husband's chair. He left at 8:30, shook Russell's hand at the door, nodded at me, Mrs. Ellison a pleasure, and was gone into a black car, and the door closed, and the family exhaled the way you do when company leaves. And that exhale is where the worst part started. I was at the sink. I had gotten up to do the dishes because that is my place. That is the shape they've assigned me. The soft, harmless shape at the sink with her hands in the water. From the dining room I could hear them. They'd forgotten I was there. That's the thing about being furniture. Furniture doesn't have ears. It was Russell and Denise. Just the two of them, now the suburbs husband out front on his phone, Jordan banished upstairs. "Friday," Denise was saying. "Cedar Glen has the bed Friday. We have to commit by tomorrow or we lose it." Good, do it." Russell's voice, low fast, the voice of a man counting hours. "Once she's at Cedar Glen, the house clears. I can refinance clean close with Vance, and this whole nightmare's over. She won't even know it's gone, Dee. By the time she's settled in over there, she won't even remember the house." "Russ?" A pause. "You don't think where I mean. She's our mother. I think she's a 64-year-old woman who shells peas and sweeps a building and lives in the past. And I think if we don't handle this, she's going to end up a burden neither of us can carry. It's for her own good, Denise. She can't keep living in the past. Somebody's got to make the hard call." And Denise, my Denise who loves me, from her careful, wincing distance, said the thing I will hear in the quiet for the rest of my life. She said, tired, not cruel, just done. "You're right. She doesn't even understand what's happening anyway." I stood at the sink with the water running over my hands. I want to tell you exactly what that was, because I've had a lifetime to learn the difference between the kinds of pain, and this one had its own particular shape. It was not the pain of being hated. Hated I could have stood. Hated has heat in it. Hated means you matter. This was the other thing. This was the pain of being finished with. Of 2 children you carried and fed and sat up with through fevers, deciding in low voices over your own dinner table that the most loving thing they could do was file you away somewhere you wouldn't be a problem, and being so sure of your smallness that they did it 3 rooms from where you stood, never once dropping their voices for fear you'd hear, because in their minds you weren't really there to hear anything anymore. She doesn't even understand what's happening. I understood everything. I had always understood everything. That was the whole tragedy of it. My hand had found the steel toolbox on the shelf by the back door without my telling it to. My fingers were on the cold clasp. And I thought about the photograph underneath the wrenches, 2 kids squinting into the sun in front of a building they were about to lose, certain the world was about to open. I thought about Sam saying, "I don't know how to protect you." I thought about the promise I made him on the edge of our bed, and the $32 million of kept promise sitting in folders 4 blocks away, and I thought they don't know. They will never ever guess. To these 2 children, I am exactly as small as I've spent 40 years making myself look. And the tears came. Quiet ones. The water was running and they couldn't hear me, and I didn't make a sound. I let them fall into the sink with the dishwater, and I did not wipe my face because there was no one there to wipe it for, and that was the truth of my whole life standing in that one moment at that one sink. I heard a step on the stairs. Jordan. She'd come down for water, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway and saw me, saw my face, the only one in that house who ever looked long enough to see it, and her eyes went wide and she opened her mouth. I shook my head. Just barely. "Not now, baby. Not yet." She closed her mouth. She came and stood beside me at the sink, this 17-year-old child, and she put her hand on my back between my shoulder blades, and she didn't say a single word. She just stood there with me while the water ran the one person in the world who knew I was still in the room. And something in me that had been waiting 40 years to be told, it was time, finally heard the word. After they were all asleep, I put on my coat and I walked the 4 blocks to Reed Street. I didn't go in. I just stood across from the building under the one working streetlight, and I called Patricia Boyd, who answered on the second ring, even though it was past midnight, because she's been my lawyer for 25 years, and she knew this call was coming, the way you know a storm is coming from the smell of the air. "Vivian." "It's time," I said. "Pull everything together. The trust, the preservation, filing, all of it. I want it ready to file the morning of Vance's closing." A pause on the line. "Then you know that once we file, there's no curtain to step back behind. Everyone knows. Your children know. The whole city knows who Reed Street Holdings is and who's been holding this neighborhood together for 40 years. There's no more invisible after this." I looked across the street at the dark windows of the building Howard Vance stole from me that I bought back at a tax sale. He'd have laughed to see with the families sleeping warm inside it, who'd never know my name. "Patricia," I said, "I've been invisible since I was 24 years old. I made myself a wall so that nobody could take this place apart, and it worked. It worked better than I ever dreamed. But a wall doesn't get to be tired. A wall doesn't get to be loved. And my whole family just decided over a pot roast that I'm a burden to be filed away by Friday." "So we stop being a wall," she said. "So we stop being a wall," I said. "Get me everything. Get me Earl. And Patricia, find out the exact time and place Gregory Vance is sitting down to close that deal. Because I am going to walk into that room, and I am going to set 40 years on the table in front of him, and his father's son is going to find out what I've spent my whole life learning." Which is what? I almost laughed. The first real thing close to a laugh I'd felt in days. How to be the smartest person in a room. I said that nobody ever bothered to look at. I hung up. I stood in the cold a moment longer the way I had 1,000 nights before the woman the whole world walked past. Then I went home to the back room of my son's house, and for the first time in a very long time, I slept like the dead. Because the silence was almost over. I'd spent it well. And in 3 days, every one of them was finally going to look. For 2 days, 2 stories ran side by side, and only I could see both at once. In one story, my children were winning. Denise confirmed the bed at Cedar Glen and told me kneeling beside my chair with the brochure and her gentlest voice that they'd found me. A wonderful place, Mama, with people your own age and activities. She said activities the way you'd say it to a child. I let her hold my hand. I said, "That sounds nice, baby," because it wasn't time yet. Russell booked the moving men for Friday morning. He spent those 2 days on the phone hunting a ghost, calling every records office in the county trying to put a face to Reed Street Holdings so he could lean on them and close his deal and save the house he didn't know I'd already saved once before. In the other story, the one running quietly underneath Patricia Boyd and Earl Whitfield worked through 2 nights. The Marigold Row Community Land Trust came together page by page on Earl's conference table. 41 parcels drafted to transfer in a single coordinated filing. Rents capped in perpetuity. A preservation designation that would wrap the whole 11 blocks in a legal shell the city's eminent domain couldn't crack because you cannot condemn for private redevelopment what's already been dedicated in public record to permanent community use. Patricia walked me through every clause. I made her walk me through it twice. The specifics are how you'll know you weren't crazy, Sam used to say, and I had learned that lesson so deep it had become my bones. I went to see Deacon Green. I told him the truth, all of it in his kitchen, and watched an 81-year-old man set down his coffee cup with a hand that shook and look at me like he was seeing a person he'd stood next to in church for 30 years for the very first time. "Vivian Ellison," he finally said. "All this time, you." "Me," I said. "I needed you not to know Albert. I needed everybody not to know. But I need you now. On Friday, I'm going to need this neighborhood to stand in a room and be witnesses. Will you bring them?" He stood up from his table. He buttoned his coat, though we were sitting indoors, the way men of his generation do when a thing becomes serious. "Child," he said, "I will bring every soul on this row who can still walk." And Patricia found me the time and the place. Friday, 10 in the morning. The closing was set for the 31st floor of the Hartwell Tower downtown in the glass conference room of Vance Development, where Gregory Vance intended to sign the papers that would begin the end of my neighborhood. My son would be there to deliver a thing he could never deliver. And so would I. I dressed carefully Friday morning, not the cardigan. I have a navy suit I bought 11 years ago for Sam's funeral and have not worn since because there has been nowhere in my small invisible life to wear it. I pressed it the night before. I put on the pearl earrings Sam gave me for our 40th, the only extravagance I ever let myself keep. I looked at the woman in the mirror, and I did not recognize her, and then I did all at once. There she was, 24 years old, squinting into the sun in front of a building she was about to lose, finally grown all the way up. I rode the elevator to the 31st floor with Patricia on one side of me and Earl on the other, and a leather folder in my hands that weighed almost nothing and weighed 40 years. I could see them through the glass wall before they saw me. Gregory Vance at the head of the table in his good coat. 2 lawyers. A man from the city. And Russell in his new suit, gray-faced, a pen already in his hand. A stack of papers in front of him that would take his house and his business the moment he signed an exchange for a promise he had no power on earth to keep. Denise was there too in the corner because Russell had wanted family for the photographs. She'd told me that morning she had a meeting. This was the meeting. I opened the glass door. The room turned. You know how a room turns when the wrong person walks in that little hitch in the air. Russell half rose out of his chair, the pen still in his hand. Mama, how did you—" He looked at Patricia, at Earl, at the navy suit, and none of it computed because the woman in his head who shelled peas could not be standing in this glass room downtown in pearls. "You can't be here. Mama, you need to go home. The car's supposed to take you to Cedar." "Sit down, Russell," I said gently. He sat down. I think it was the first time in 10 years he'd done a thing I asked the first time I asked it. I walked to the foot of the table. I did not look at my son because if I'd looked at my son in that moment, I might not have been able to do what came next. I looked at Gregory Vance. "Mr. Vance," I said, "I don't believe we've been properly introduced, though you've shaken my hand. My name is Vivian Reed Ellison. I'm here representing Reed Street Holdings, the owner of the 41 parcels you've spent the last 6 months trying to buy. The faceless company your people couldn't find behind the lawyers." I set the leather folder on the table and opened it. "You've been looking for the owner of this neighborhood, Mr. Vance. You found her months ago. You shook her hand in a community center kitchen and asked my son and her—" The smile was already gone. His father's smile gone right off his face, and underneath it something I'd waited 40 years to see on a Vance uncertainty. I took out the deeds and I laid them down one after another, the soft sound of paper on glass, 41 of them, while the whole room watched and nobody breathed. And then I said the only thing I'd come there to say, the thing I'd held since I was 24 years old. You only get to say it once, so you wait until it'll be heard. For 40 years, I said, every one of you walked past me to reach that door. Not one of you ever thought to ask who held the key. What happened next happened fast, the way 40 years can collapse into 90 seconds once the pin is pulled. Patricia stepped forward and laid down the second folder, the thick one. "These parcels are not for sale," she said in her menu-reading voice. "And as of 9 o'clock this morning, they never can be. At 9 a.m., all 41 were transferred into the Marigold Row Community Land Trust, filed with the county with a historic preservation designation attached. The land is now dedicated in perpetuity to community use. It cannot be sold for private redevelopment. It cannot be taken by eminent domain for this project or any other. Mr. Vance, your renaissance requires this footprint. You no longer have any legal path to it. As of this morning, the project is dead." The city man was already gathering his coat. The lawyers were whispering. Gregory Vance sat very still, and I watched the arithmetic run behind his eyes, the same arithmetic his father must have run 40 years ago. Except this time it came out the other way. "Who are you?" he said. Not cruel, almost wondering. So I told him the last part. The part that was only ever for him. "Your father," I said, "was named Howard Vance. 40 years ago, he sat in my kitchen and smiled at 2 24-year-olds and told them a story about a lien that didn't exist, and he took the first building they ever owned, 8 units on the east end of this row, and a judge told us we should have read more carefully." I let that sit. I read more carefully after that, Mr. Vance. I read everything. I have spent the last 4 decades buying back every brick your father taught me could be stolen, and making certain that no man with your name and your father's smile could ever do to this neighborhood what was done to me. I didn't know you'd be the one to come, but I built the wall for you all the same. I've been building it your whole life." He didn't have anything to say to that. There wasn't anything. He stood finally, and he buttoned his good coat, and the son of Howard Vance walked out of a glass room, having lost to a woman he'd looked straight through, and the circle that opened on the coldest night of my life closed without a sound. That left my children. Denise was crying in the corner, not the careful wincing distance now, but something cracked all the way open. Russell sat staring at the papers in front of him, the ones he hadn't signed, slowly understanding that the deal he'd staked his house and his business on had never been real. Could never have been real because the land he'd promised to deliver had belonged the entire time to the mother he was sending to Cedar Glen that afternoon. "You—" His voice broke. "Mama, you own it, all of it. You let me. I almost lost the house. I almost lost everything. And you sat there. You sat there shelling peas, and you let me. And here is where I want you to understand something, because this is the part the story could have gotten wrong, the part where a bitter woman takes her revenge and calls it justice. I did not enjoy this. You never asked me, Russell," I said, and I was not angry. I was tired, and I was sad, and I was 40 years honest. Not once. In all your fear and all your scrambling, it never once crossed your mind that your mother might know something worth knowing. You introduced me as the woman who keeps the place tidy. You decided over my own dinner table that I didn't understand what was happening. I looked at Denise. Both of you did. You were so certain of how small I was that you planned my disappearance 3 rooms from where I stood and never thought to lower your voices. Denise put her face in her hands. I am not going to let you lose the house, I said, and I watched the shock of it hit them that mercy was on the table had always been on the table. Earl is buying out your second mortgage this afternoon, through the trust, the business too. You'll keep both Russell, but not the way you've been running them. Ellison & Son is going to do the rehab work on these 41 buildings. Real work, honest work at fair wages. Restoring this neighborhood instead of selling it. And you're going to do it as a contractor for the trust. And you're going to earn back brick by brick the thing you bet on a stranger's promise. That's the only deal I'm offering. Take it or don't. He took it. Of course he took it. But I'll tell you, it wasn't the deal that broke him open. It was the word earn. My son had spent his whole life wanting to be looked at the way Gregory Vance gets looked at, and I think in that glass room he finally understood that the looking he wanted was the cheap kind, and that the woman at the foot of the table had something he'd never have until he built it himself. Denise came to me 3 days later, not to the house, to Reed Street. She knocked on the door of the upstairs apartment with the filing cabinets and the good chair, because Jordan had told her where I went on the nights I disappeared. And I let her in, and she stood in the middle of 40 years of my real life, and she did not say I'm sorry. I tried to put you in a home, and she did not ask for anything, which is how I knew she'd actually changed. She said, I don't know you at all, do I? No, baby, I said. You don't, but you can. That part was always up to you, not me. She cried again. Then she did the thing that mattered more than any apology. She said, Saturday mornings, you open the center at 6. Would you let me come sweep with you? I want you to tell me. All of it. From the beginning. From the building you lost. I have not forgiven my children all the way. And I want to be honest with you about that because the stories that wrap it all up in a bow with one good cry are lying to you. Forgiveness like that isn't a moment. It's a Saturday, and then another Saturday, and a broom in time. But I opened the door wider, and I let my daughter in, and that was the beginning of the only inheritance I ever cared about leaving her. Jordan I named to the trust not to run it. She's 17, but to learn it. To sit with Patricia and Earl and the board, and understand young what it took the rest of us a lifetime to learn that the most powerful thing you can be is patient and unseen and absolutely certain of your own worth when no one else can be bothered to look. And Sam. When it was all done, Earl gave me an envelope he'd been holding for 11 years since the week before Sam died with instructions to give it to me only when the wall finally came down. I read it alone in the good chair by the lamp. I won't tell you everything it said. Some things you keep. But I'll tell you the line I think about most. My husband, who never knew how to protect me and spent 40 years helping me protect everyone else, wrote in his terrible handwriting, Vivian, I always knew the day would come when they'd finally have to look at you. I'm sorry I won't be there to see their faces, but I was there for the part that mattered. I was there the night you decided who you were going to be. Everything after that, you built. Don't let anybody, not even our own children, tell you it was luck. Or me, or anybody but you. It was always you. S. I sat with that a long while. Then I folded it, and I put it in the toolbox under the wrenches next to the photograph of 2 kids squinting into the sun. It's a Saturday now, months later. I opened the community center at 6 with a key the trust had cut new that turns easy in the lock. Denise comes most weeks. We sweep the floor. Nobody's going to bulldoze in a building that belongs now and forever to the people inside it. The renderings are gone. On the wall by the door in a frame Jordan made me hang, there's the photograph that spent 40 years hidden under Sam's wrenches. 2 kids 24 years old in front of a soft bricked walk-up, certain the world was about to open for them. It did. It just took 40 years and it didn't open the way they thought. They spent 4 decades looking past me. I used every single one of them. I've told you my story plain the way Sam taught me to keep things, the names, the dates, the dollar amounts, so you'd know I wasn't crazy, and so you'd know what's true. But here's what I'd want you to carry out of it, if you carry anything. The world will tell you you're small. Sometimes the people who love you most will be the ones who say it loudest, and they won't even mean to be cruel. They'll mean to be practical. They will look past you and call it looking after you. And the temptation every single day will be to make them see you, to prove it, to set the urn down and announce who you really are. Don't until it counts. There is a strength the world never claps for, the strength to stay quiet, to build in the dark, to let people misjudge you while you become exactly who you decided to be on your hardest night. Being underestimated isn't only a wound. Handled right, it's a kind of cover. It's time. And time spent well is the one fortune nobody can talk you out of. And measure your worth by the right thing. I never built that wall to be rich. I built it so an old woman on Pelham could keep her $400 rent, so a block full of families could stay rooted while the world tried to price them out. The money was never the legacy. The protection was. When they finally looked at me, what they found wasn't a bank account. It was 40 years of quiet love poured into a place brick by brick. So let them walk past you if they must. Just make sure you're using the time.